World War I. In the early 20th century, the world stood on the edge of a conflict that would reshape history forever. Empires were powerful, nations were ambitious, and tensions between countries have been building for decades. No one could imagine that a single event would ignite one of the deadliest wars the world had ever seen. This conflict would involve dozens of nations, introduce terrifying new weapons, and lead to the collapse of mighty empires. Known as the World War I, or the Great War, it lasted from 1914 to 1918 and changed politics, borders, and societies across the globe. Millions of soldiers and civilians lost their lives, and the war left a deep scar on humanity. To understand why it happened and how it changed the world, we must go back to the tensions, alliances, and dramatic events that led to the outbreak of this devastating war. 1. Rising tensions in Europe. Before the war began, Europe was like a powder keg waiting for a spark. Several powerful empires dominated the continent, including the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. These empires competed for power, land, and influence. Nationalism was growing stronger, and many ethnic groups wanted independence from imperial rule. Another major factor was the system of military alliances. Countries formed alliances to protect themselves, but these alliances also meant that if one nation went to war, others would quickly be pulled into the conflict. The Triple Alliance included Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, while the Triple Entente brought together France, Russia, and Britain. These alliances created two powerful rival camps. At the same time, nations began building massive armies and modern weapons. Militarism became a source of national pride. Countries prepared for war even though they hoped to avoid it. Unfortunately, the situation was fragile, and it only needed one small spark to trigger a massive conflict. 2. The assassination that started the war. That spark came in June 1914 in the city of Sarajevo. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, visited the city with his wife. During the visit, a young nationalist named Gavrilo Princip assassinated the Archduke. This event shocked Europe and triggered a chain reaction. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for supporting the assassin and declared war. Russia came to Serbia's defense. Germany supported Austria-Hungary, while France and Britain supported Russia. Within weeks, much of Europe was at war. What began as a regional conflict quickly turned into a global war involving countries from Europe, Asia, Africa, and the Americas. 3. Life in the trenches. As the war expanded, soldiers found themselves fighting in brutal conditions. Much of the fighting on the Western Front took place in trenches, long, narrow ditches dug into the ground for protection. These trenches stretched for hundreds of miles across France and Belgium. Life in the trenches was miserable. Soldiers faced mud, disease, rats, and constant danger from enemy attacks. New weapons such as machine guns, poison gas, and heavy artillery made the battlefield extremely deadly. Battles often lasted for months and resulted in enormous casualties while gaining very little territory. Famous battles, such as the Battle of the Somme and the Battle of Verdun, became symbols of the war's brutality. Millions of soldiers were killed or wounded in these horrific battles. 4. The war becomes global. Although the war started in Europe, it quickly spread around the world. Colonies and allied nations joined the fighting. The Ottoman Empire joined the Central Powers, while countries such as Japan and later the United States supported the Allies. A major turning point occurred in 1917 when the United States entered the war. After German submarine attacks on American ships and growing support for the Allies, the U.S. declared war on Germany. The arrival of fresh American troops gave new strength to the Allied forces. By 1918, Germany and its allies were exhausted. Economic hardship, military defeats, and internal revolutions weakened the Central Powers. 5. The end of the war. In November 1918, Germany agreed to an armistice, an agreement to stop fighting. This effectively ended the World War I after 4 years of devastating conflict. The following year, world leaders gathered in France to negotiate peace at the Paris Peace Conference. The result was the Treaty of Versailles, which placed heavy penalties on Germany. Many historians believe this treaty created tensions that eventually led to another global conflict decades later. Conclusion: the World War I was one of the most destructive wars in human history. It caused the deaths of more than 16 million people and led to the collapse of powerful empires that had ruled for centuries. New nations were created, political systems changed, and the balance of global power shifted dramatically. But perhaps the most lasting impact of the war was the lesson it taught about the dangers of nationalism, militarism, and political rivalries. The devastation of the Great War shocked the world and inspired efforts to prevent such conflicts in the future. Yet history reminds us that peace is fragile. The legacy of World War I continues to shape the modern world, reminding humanity of the terrible cost of war and the importance of diplomacy and cooperation.